So, I'm 23 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my father has always hated me. In fact, it was not just me. He also hated my mother. He hated the fact that he had to get married to her, and she was not a big fan of his either. My parents started dating in their final year of college, and after 3 months of dating, she found out that she was pregnant. She found out she was pregnant. She wanted to keep the baby, and she had told him that he did not necessarily need to stay involved, and he was perfectly fine with leaving. But then my paternal grandparents and my maternal grandparents were not fine with that. They intervened a little, and eventually they convinced my parents to marry one another. For the first couple of years, things were fine. But I think when I was around 3 or 4 years old, I started to realize that my parents did not really like each other that much. They were constantly fighting with each other. They were either bickering or they were just talking to each other. And as I grew older, it just got worse. Then, when I was around 7 years old, my mother was diagnosed with stomach cancer, and it was already in its advanced stages. We weren't even able to detect it until it was too late, and though we tried our best, we couldn't save her. And about a year and a half later, she passed on. I was obviously very upset, but my dad was very neutral about the whole thing. To be honest, it felt like he had moved on from her as soon as she was diagnosed, and I don't want to say it out loud because it's a really terrible thing to say, but to be honest, it felt like he was just waiting for her to go for as long as she was sick. He hired a nurse and everything to take care of her, but he himself was hardly there for her. She didn't seem to care about that either. She loved me. I was always there for her, and she was there for me as long as she was around. But after she passed, things were very different for me. My dad completely gave up on me and felt like he just treated me as a reminder of his past, which wasn't surprising because even when my mother was still around, he didn't seem to like me too much. He always had treated me like a bit of a burden, but at least my mother's presence stopped him from being outright mean to me. But after she was gone, there was nothing stopping him from treating me like I was absolutely nothing. He broke my confidence. He constantly disregarded me. And he pretended like I didn't even exist. Or he didn't bother to acknowledge my existence. It was only to make me feel small. And I tried my best to steer clear of him because I hated him. About a year after my mom passed away, he brought home his current partner. Let's call her Sienna. He had started dating pretty much a few months after my mom passed, and I think he had been with Sienna for about 4 months before he decided to bring her home. And within a couple more months, she had moved in with us, and so had her children. She had 2 kids from a previous marriage, and she did receive child support, but her ex was not in the picture anymore. So she had full custody of the children, and I had to give up my room so the kids could move in. I didn't like my step siblings or Sienna, but that hardly mattered to my father because he got married to her, and after that, it was almost as if I was invisible in the house. Unless somebody wanted to push me around or bully me. My step siblings were not nice to me at all. And as for my father and Sienna, they treated me like I was hardly even there. So I tried to shrink into myself. So people would just leave me alone. And I had all the basic stuff that I needed. So I just made up my mind that I would get out of here as soon as possible. I did have my grandparents supporting me morally. They even wanted to contact CPS, but they were afraid that if things went south, they would never be able to see me again, and it would make my life even more difficult in that house. So I personally did not want that, and I stopped them. I think the last straw for me was at one of my father's anniversary parties, and he was celebrating Sienna and his marriage. Both of them were a bit drunk, and during one of his speeches, he decided to make a very crass remark about me. He decided to call me a mistake from his past. And he was glad that Sienna had accepted me, even though he never had been able to do so, because he felt like he had been forced into raising me just because my mother was a stubborn and crazy woman who didn't care about anybody apart from herself. That was obviously very hurtful, not just for me, but also because of the fact that he had degraded the one person that I have truly loved the most, my mother. I couldn't take that kind of disrespect, and my grandparents and I left the party immediately. And my paternal grandparents decided to take me under their wing and let me live with them. My mom's parents lived out of state, so they contributed the way they could, financially. It was my grandparents who managed to send me to college, and now I'm doing pretty well for myself. I'm about to graduate. I've had therapy, and I think I'm dealing with my emotions better. And I've also been interning in my grandfather's company so that I can eventually take over in the future. So, yeah, my life was going pretty well. But then recently, I lost my paternal grandfather, and that was pretty bad. It happened a few days ago. We are still reeling from the shock of it because everybody thought that he was a healthy man. That's what it looked like. But then he had an aneurysm in the middle of the night, and by the time we woke up, he was gone. My grandmother is obviously very upset, but she's very strong as well. And she has taken over everything, and with a little help from me, we've been managing. Of course, I've been staying at home for now and have taken a break from college. The funeral was 2 days ago, and my father happened to attend it, even though he had had absolutely no contact with his parents after they decided to take me in. It was my grandparents who decided to cut him off, but the least they could have done was at least try to reach out to them and make things right. But he didn't even bother. However, he showed up to the funeral, although it was without Sienna or her children. We didn't talk, didn't seem appropriate at the time, but then we saw him again at the reading of the will. That was yesterday, and again, we didn't talk, but he totally lost it after the will had been read. Of course, certain things were expected. He left all his shares of the company to my grandmother, so now she's in charge. He was about to retire anyway, so she had been preparing herself mentally to take over, since she's a couple of years younger than him, so that was not surprising. But what actually came as a shock was the fact that instead of leaving all his money and assets to my grandmother, or even to his son, he decided to leave it all to me. The only thing my dad got out of the will was an old vintage car that my grandpa had, a collectible of sorts, and I could tell that even that was just because he did not want my dad to be able to contest the will, claiming that he hadn't been left anything at all, and that was unfair. Obviously, my dad was the only person who lost it. My grandmother was pretty happy because she didn't even need that money herself. She and my grandfather had built the company together, although she had come into the picture a little later. But her expertise had definitely come to use. So she has her own money. My grandpa had his own. So his decision to leave everything to me did not bother her at all. She was quite happy with it. But I could tell that my dad had not been expecting this at all. He totally lost it. He started telling the lawyer to recheck everything. He started saying that there must have been some sort of a mistake, that his father could not have done this to him, but it had happened, and it was the truth. He just had to deal with it. In the end, he just stormed out without even looking at us, and that was that. Or at least I thought that was that, but clearly it's not the end of anything. So anyway, earlier today I received a message from my father telling me he really wanted to talk to me. He said he would prefer it to be in person, but I was not going to give him the benefit of meeting me in person, so I told him that whatever it is that he had to say, he had to put it in an email and tell me, because I was not going to meet him. After everything that he had put me throughout my childhood, I had no intention of talking to him. I could tell that he was disturbed, by what he had found out, but again, that was not my problem. So then he did as I asked, and he sent me an email telling me that he had really been counting on the money from his inheritance to fix his life. Because apparently the company that he had started had been going through a bit of a crisis financially, and he really needed this help. He had thought that maybe his father would have left him something, but he was wrong, and I don't understand how he even thought that my grandpa would leave him anything after what he had done. I mean, he had had absolutely no contact with my grandparents for the past couple of years. So why would he even have this unreasonable expectation? If he had even bothered to get in touch with them and apologize and make things right, then things might have made sense. But given his behavior, I don't understand why he would believe this. Anyway, now he wants me to share my inheritance with him, split it, preferably, because clearly I don't need that kind of money because I have my grandmother backing me. And I have a whole life ahead of me to make up for this. He told me that he had always been very cruel to me, but I have the chance to be better than him, to prove myself the bigger person by helping him out here, and he's really counting on me. And here's the thing, I don't really want to help him. I know that it's probably the kind of thing to do, and I know that'll probably make me look like the bigger person, but then I don't really care about any of that. I have a future. He's right about that. And he had his chance and he blew it. So I want to invest this money in myself. And I want to put my business degree to good use. And this will really help me out in future. So I don't want to split anything with him. It's a significant chunk of money. I don't want him to have to do anything with it. So I guess the dilemma that I'm in right now is whether I should help him out here or not. WIBTA if I said no? Update 1. Hey, so I had a discussion with my grandmother about all of this, and it's been a couple of days since that email, and since then he has been messaging me every day, and he's been quite desperate about the whole thing. Clearly, he really needs this, so I spoke to my grandmother about it, and she told me that I should do whatever I think is right, because at the end of the day, I was the one who had been wrong here, not her. She told me that she and her husband, my grandpa, also kind of felt responsible for whatever had happened because it was they who had insisted that my parents get married and raise me together, even though they did not seem inclined to do that. It was at their insistence that my father had decided to get married to my mother, even though he'd never been interested in getting married at that part of his life. He didn't even want to raise a kid. He didn't want to be a father. Yet they had talked him into it, and now they feel guilty. And my grandpa had apparently felt that way forever, which is probably why he made this decision. When my grandma told me about it, honestly, it was not that difficult to believe, because I did sometimes think about it. But my grandparents have always been good to me, so I don't blame them for anything. I guess back then, they were just doing the traditional thing. They were doing what they thought was right. And anyway, it was not like they were the ones who had directly mistreated me. So regardless of what role they played in all of this, I don't hold them responsible, and I made sure that my grandmother knew that because I didn't want her feeling bad about any of this. When I said this, she kind of broke down into tears and told me that if my grandpa had known this, that I had never held them responsible for any of it, he would have felt much better, and it was tragic that he was gone. And he would never be able to know this, but I think he knows, and I think everybody knows that I love my grandparents. They raised me, they were always there for me, and they saved me from my dad. A life with him would have been the real tragedy, and they should know how grateful I am to have them. But anyway, enough about my grandparents. Let me get back to the topic at hand. So after the conversation with my grandma, I decided I was going to stick to my decision and I was not going to help my dad because ultimately I needed the money as well. And he has never been kind to me, so why should I show him any kindness at all? I'm not interested in being the bigger person. And I think there is a fine line between being the bigger person and being a pushover, and I'm not one. I'm never going to be able to forget how he has treated me throughout my life, how he has allowed me to be bullied, how he has bullied me himself, and the fact that he had called me a mistake. That's what's going to stay with me throughout my life. You don't treat people like that and then expect them to help you out when you're in trouble. That's not how the world works, and that's definitely not how I work. Maybe a better person than me, a more generous person than me, would have done something different, but again, I am who I am, and if this looks like I'm holding a grudge, then yes, I definitely am. He was my father. He was the one who was supposed to have protected me from all the misery of the world, or at least tried to do so, but instead he became the source of all the greatest trouble in my life. He was the one who turned out to be the reason I needed therapy, not the one pushing me to get therapy so I can heal from whatever the world does to me. He let me down in the worst way possible. He betrayed me. And I'm never going to be able to forgive him for that, and I don't think that I should have to. Even right now, I think that if I tell him I'm never going to speak to him again, and that I'm going to make sure that my grandmother also never speaks to him again, he's going to be fine with it, as long as he gets the money. He just has no soul. He has no heart. And I don't want anything to do with a person like this. In fact, I think the only reason he even showed up at the funeral was because he wanted the money, nothing else. Maybe it's a cruel thing to say, but yeah, I think I know how cruel he is capable of being. Like I said, in my original post when my mother was suffering, he was just behaving as if he couldn't wait for her to be gone. So, a person who can behave like that, I don't put anything past him. At least not anymore, because when I was younger, I had been naive enough to believe that he might change and become a better father. But now I know that that's never going to happen because this is simply just who he is. Update 2. So because I had blocked my father, he decided to create a new email account and started messaging me there. I had not responded to any of his previous emails because I really did not think that it was necessary for me to do so. Now it's been close to 2 weeks that I've been ignoring him, and I guess he couldn't take the suspense anymore, so he decided to create another account to talk to me, and here he started threatening me, telling me that he was going to tell everybody in the family what I had done. He was going to make sure that nobody ever spoke to me or my grandmother ever again because we are being very selfish and cruel right now. We can't possibly need this kind of money, and he needs it. And he also brought up the fact that it was my grandmother and my grandfather who had insisted he become a father at such a young age. They were the ones who had ruined his life and mine by extension, so I should be blaming him and not trying to make him the villain when he was actually the victim. I mean, I honestly don't buy any of it because, like I said in my previous post, I won't deny the involvement that my grandparents had in any of this, but let's not act as if they were the bad guys. My mom was also pressured into a situation. She had been talked into this marriage, even though she didn't want it for herself, because why would a woman want to get married to a man who clearly did not want a relationship with her in the long-term sense? It was clear that she was also frustrated in this marriage, but she never took out that frustration on me. She was always kind to me. My father was not the same way. He blamed me. He called me a mistake. He treated me badly, and yet he somehow still thinks he's the victim here. Yes, maybe it was not right for my grandparents to insist my parents get married, but at the end of the day, it was still their own decision. They could have just chosen to stand their ground, and yet they didn't do that. But while my mother was fine with accepting that mistake of hers, my father was never able to deal with it, and he has always played the victim ever since. I knew for a fact that he was going to bring this up because truly, he's pathetic. As an adult, he could have chosen to be kind to somebody who had nothing to do with any of his problems, because it was not as if I was the one who had pressured him into the situation. So it was ridiculous of him to take out his anger on me when I was literally a child and struggling to understand what was going on in my family. He made my life a nightmare, and yet he thinks he's the victim. That is just laughable. Anyway, when I read that email, it really rubbed me the wrong way, because he was here, pretending to be the victim, making my grandparents out to be the bad guys, when they were the only people who recognized their mistake, who acknowledged what they had done, and decided to take accountability for it by talking to me about it and helping me out in tough times. Whereas my dad did nothing but play the victim and try to make a child the scapegoat. He was not about to tell me that I was making the wrong choice. Here, I was not going to let him do that. So I wrote back to him, told him everything that I thought of him, especially whatever I have mentioned here so far. And I also told him that I was not going to be giving him a single dollar out of all the money that I'm going to be receiving, because he simply does not deserve it. He has been nothing but cruel to me, and even when my mother was wrong, he was nothing but heartless and selfish with her. He never loved her. He never even tried to be nice to her. He was always fighting with her. And even when she was sick, he only did the bare minimum, and he couldn't even be a friend to her. That was just the saddest part. And I can understand that life hasn't been easy for him or fair to him. But that doesn't mean that he can take it out on other people and get away without any consequences, because let's be real. Life is difficult for everyone, but not everybody chooses to be unkind. So whatever he did, it was a conscious choice, and he cannot just brush off the consequence of his own decisions. I told him that the money was mine, and even if he goes around talking crap about me to the rest of the family, I don't think that anybody is going to feel sorry for him, because people witnessed what happened at that party. People know how he has treated me his entire life. And the only reason that the rest of the family has even bothered to keep in touch with him is because they don't want any drama. But if he is so bent on creating drama, then I'm pretty sure he should know that in the end it's going to hurt him more than it's going to hurt me or my grandma. So I sent that message. Then I blocked this new email account that he had created as well, because I really don't want to hear from him. I don't care about his opinion. I don't care what he has to say. I just want him to leave us alone right now. I'm already going through a very tough time because of my grandpa's passing. I don't want him adding on to this. Update 3. Hey, so it's been 2 days since my last update, and of course, within a couple of hours after I sent that email to my father, he decided to show up at my door. At that point, it was just me and my grandma at home. Everybody who had been visiting to give condolences had gone home, and it was pretty late in the evening. We were obviously very concerned because he was acting like a total madman. He was banging on the door. He was demanding to be let in and speak to us. And we were just not in the right space of mind to deal with that kind of thing. Because, mind you, it's just been a couple of weeks since we have lost a very important family member. We loved him, and it was a very sudden, tragic demise. So naturally, we are taking our time to deal with it, and yet here he is, only talking about money. That did not sit right with me, and I decided to open the door and told him immediately that if he did anything that was going to disturb us anymore, we were going to call the cops immediately. I told him to leave, and I told him to leave us alone because we don't want anything to do with him. And yelling at us is not going to force us to give him any sort of financial help. So he should just give up. He seemed a little taken aback by my attitude, because in the past I had never stood up to him because I was scared, but then I was also a child. Now I'm not a kid anymore. I'm not scared of him because I can see him for what he truly is. Anyway, he tried to square up to me. He started acting like he was not scared, but then I told my grandma to start calling the cops, and that's when he made a run for it. It was actually quite funny, because I could see that he was genuinely scared. I'm guessing that he was already in trouble at home or something, and he probably did not want to increase his own problems. He was cussing me out as he left. He was very angry as he walked away, but thankfully, he did walk away. And I'm guessing that now he might leave us alone because the very real threat of cops is being held over his head. I'm going to go back to college next week, so naturally I'm kind of worried about my grandma because he might try to show up here again. So I've told neighbors to keep an eye, and they are nice people, so I trust them. We have also decided to amp up the security around the house. And if things get too intense, I've told my grandmother to call the cops without any hesitation, and then I'll be speaking to a lawyer so I can get a restraining order against my father because he has no business bothering his mother like this. Basically, I've taken care of everything because I think it's my turn now. My grandparents have always been there for me. They've taken care of me, and now I'm going to take care of them. I already have the money to establish myself, and after getting some experience, I think I'm just going to expand my grandpa's company because that's what I have always intended to do, quite frankly. His legacy will live on with or without my father. Update 4. Hey everybody, so it's been a year since my last update, and I kind of forgot to post because I got very busy. But I graduated recently and I've started working with my grandma. We do plan on expanding the company, and we are currently sticking to whatever my grandfather had in mind before he passed away. But after that, we're going to make our own decisions. It feels a bit weird doing all of this without him, but I'm used to it now. I do miss him. I do know my grandmother does as well, but she keeps busy and so do I. My father, thankfully, has not bothered to contact us after that incident, and I'm hoping that it stays that way because I don't want anything to do with him. I did hear from a couple of people that he had to sell his company a couple of months ago, so I'm guessing that he was not able to save it, and well, tough luck. But yeah, whatever. I'm only concerned about my future now, and so far, it's looking good. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.